Welcome to the League of Women Voters Candidates Forum for Minnesota House District 4B. We would like to thank the Moorhead Library for hosting us and the Moorhead Community Access Media for filming. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan political organization that encourages informed and active participation in government and works to increase the understanding of major public policy issues and influences public policy through education and advocacy. For this forum, each candidate will have a 1 minute for an opening statement, and then we'll ask audience questions, and each candidate will have 2 minutes to respond. We will then close with a 1 minute closing statement. Candidates, are you ready? Okay, we'll start with Jared. The first question, what role do you see our institutions of higher education playing for the success of the region? Oh, I'm sorry, actually opening statement. Well, okay. Yeah, you have a second to think about it while you give a 1 minute opening statement.
Get a little feedback here. But my name is Jared LeDuc. I'm a longtime resident of Clay County. I was actually born up in Bemidji and moved down when I was 5, so I've been around for a little while. I think Representative Marquardt, he's been in a good long time, and he's done some good things for us. But just in talking to some folks around, I think we feel like it's time for a change down in St. Paul, and maybe get a fresh perspective on somebody to represent us and our interests up here a little better. So that's why I'm running. I'm excited to run. I'm young, and we'll do everything we can. Thanks.
Well, that makes a difference.
Yes, Paul.
Well, good morning, and thank you to League of Women Voters for sponsoring this debate, and thanks for my opponent, Jared LeDuc, for being here. I also would like to thank the folks from District 4B for giving me the honor to serve the residents of this area for 14 years. It's been an honor and a pleasure to do that, but I wouldn't be able to run if I didn't have the strong support of my family, and my wife Colleen is here. And they always say to win an election, you have to win 50% of the voters plus one. So I always start with that plus one first. So I always ask Colleen if she has my vote, and so I proceed another year. I also have 2 daughters, Lindsay and Ashley. Lindsay is married to Grant. They have a daughter, our only granddaughter, Addison, who's about 17 months old. I'm a teacher. I've taught at Dilworth, Glidden, Felton for 31 years, and I'm proud to say both of my daughters are teachers. And so I'm very proud of that. In my 14 years in the legislature, I've tried to keep it very simple, and that is to look at every single issue on how it impacts rural Minnesota. And what I mean by that is whatever comes up, whatever there is, I look at putting rural Minnesota first. And I think that's important. I've had 14 years of working across the political aisle as we've been able to move things forward. And I think in Minnesota, things are moving in the right direction. And the economy's looking better. We were able to lower property taxes this year. For the first time in the history of our state, fund all day, every day kindergarten. Provide the largest increase in nursing homes in almost a decade, first increase in elderly waivers for senior citizens in 6 years, froze tuitions, and so I think things are moving in the right direction, and I'd like to continue and have the honor to continue to do that.
Thank you. Okay, now we'll start with the questions. And actually, Paul, we'll start with you. What role do you see our institutions of higher education playing for the success of the region?
Well, that's key, and we are blessed in this area to have a number of higher education facilities, but it's going to be those students that come out of our colleges and universities that are going to be the engine to our economic success. And we're a cold weather state, and yet Minnesota does very, very well economically, and it's because of the high quality of education that we provide and the infrastructure we provide. Minnesota, when you look at its economic impact, it's going to determine by these young people that come out of our colleges. And that's why it was crucial in this last session that we froze tuition for 2 years. And we've also promised the majority to freeze it for another 2 years if reelected. That is, I mean, we're getting to the point right now where it's difficult for students to afford college and to have that accessible to everyone who wants to attend higher education. And that is coupled with higher education with those who want to go into a career. So it's career and college education, but that's what's going to fuel our economy. And in this area, we have to make sure we continue to invest in our higher ed facilities.
Jared, same question.
All right. So obviously the higher education that we have in this area is great. It's fantastic. But growing up, I've watched most all my friends, if they go to school here, great, but they move away and they find jobs elsewhere. And why do they find jobs elsewhere? Because we don't have any. We've got jobs here and there, but there's better jobs just about everywhere else. And why is that? Is it because we tax businesses far too much? I think that's a large part of the answer. We need to have kids go to school here and stay here. Furthermore, I mean, it's great that we froze tuition, to try to keep college, keep higher education affordable. But what we really need to see is more competition in the education, market, if you will. Drive those prices down, keep schools competing for the business of students, to have students going to their schools. And that's, I think, how we get higher education to be much more effective.
Thank you. The next question we'll start with you, Jared, and that is, how well is the state providing services to help low-income families escape poverty?
Well, I think the state does a great job of helping out low-income individuals. I think there's definitely a fine balance between helping and empowering. We want to see those people that are on assistance work hard and go forward and to rise up. I don't think there's really anybody that just wants to sit and be happy with the status quo. I think in this part of the country, and we're a hardworking people, and we want to succeed. And so we need to focus on helping those programs to help people, not just to give them a handout and keep them on the program, but rather to help them to move forward and to better their lives.
Thank you. Paul, same question.
The late Senator Paul Wellstone once said, "We all do better when we all do better." And I think we've done 3 things lately that really have helped try to move people up. And one is raising the minimum wage. I think it had not been raised for about 8 years, and we've stepped that up. That will help people increase their purchasing power. Second is we provided $100 million in the bonding bill for affordable housing. That's crucial. When we can provide people with housing and stability in their lives. And the third thing we can do, which we've progressed, is to make sure we fund education. It is public education where everyone, no matter who you are and where you start or what's your income, that's the great equalizer. And by putting dollars into all-day, everyday kindergarten and putting investments in there, and then also putting criteria and accountability for school districts to meet the world's best workforce, that's the way in which you raise people out of poverty and make them even more productive in our citizens, which helps our economy overall in the state.
Thank you. And as a follow-up, how will you work to make higher education at our public institutions more affordable for students? And Paul, we'll start with you.
You have to set it as a high priority. And I've been in the legislature 14 years, and it seemed like for a few years, whenever we were cutting, we would always cut into higher education. And so you have to make sure you're putting in the right investments. And then we have to make sure it's affordable. I don't think it's right when administrator salaries at these state colleges are going up and they're getting paid more, and at the same time tuition's going up. And that's something that we did the last 2 years, as we said, we're going to end these increases on administrators, and we're going to freeze tuition. We're going to put the student first here. And I think that was a really big step in making sure that students can afford higher education.
Thank you. Jared, same question.
Well, I think like Representative Marquardt said, it is important to put those students first. Obviously, we've got a lot riding on them for our state economy, and we want good, bright young people coming out of those institutions. But as I said earlier, it's extremely important to have competition. Competition produces not only a better product, but a lower priced product. And so we need to make sure that we have enough competition with these schools. We need to make sure that we work hard enough at doing this so that our kids can go to school, so they can afford to get a great education and even a higher quality education.
Thank you. The next question that we have, and we'll start with Jared, is how could we improve transportation in our area?
Well, I think, as far as improving transportation in our area, I think we do a pretty good job of it. Obviously, I see some roads that could use some repair. And we've got to look at, budget issues. Obviously, we've got, we could use some more money for transportation. Where does it come from? Well, maybe we need to, pull out the scalpel and see where we can make cuts. See if we can't, think about maybe not having an $80 million office building or things of that nature when we've got such terrible need for our roads and highways and other forms of transportation.
Thank you.
Transportation funding is important. I was able to get 303,000 miles on my 03 Dodge Stratus before it finally quit this summer. So I've been on the roads an awful lot. So now I have another Dodge, so I'm going to try another one, see if we can get 300,000 out of that one. But it's very important, and the MnDOT says in the next 20 years we're going to be short about $600 million a year in transportation funding. So that is something we really need to deal with this session. We didn't really deal with it last time. And so I don't know what the answer is. There's better people than me on how we can fund that. But there's been bonding has been brought up, sales tax on gasoline's been brought up, increasing the tax on gasoline and so forth. The problem with improving or adding to the gas tax is that each cent you add brings in about $32 million, which really doesn't cover that. Plus, with more efficient cars, you're getting less and less from that. So I don't really like that idea. But we need to address it, and I know that's going to be, Governor Dayton has said that's going to be a major priority this year, is to find a long-term solution to our transportation to get farm products to market and so forth. It's really important.
Thank you. And the next question is, many families cannot afford childcare. What would be your solution? Paul, we'll start with you.
Well, one of the things I think we're moving to, and it's not to be a child care, but even the all-day, everyday kindergarten. And the next move is to go to universal pre-K, now starting with the 4-year-olds. And I come from an education background on this one because we know that for educational purpose, the earlier start, the better. Another thing you can do for child care is increase the child care assistant program, which has been cut over the time, and that leaves some of the providers short. Other things you can do, I think, overall in affording child care is the minimum wage. Again, I think was very important to help with those type of things. And our unemployment rate in the Fargo-Moorhead area is only around 3%, even less than the state at 4.3. So you have a lot of people working, need the child care, and I think the state, with education, but also increasing the child care assistant program would be some ways to do that.
Thank you. Same question.
Sure. I think as far as affording child care and keeping it affordable, there's so much there. As Representative Marquardt said, our employment rate is about 3%, and that's great. I wonder what our underemployment rate is. Those folks out there working as hard as they can and just barely getting by. And I think it's important, for this area to attract better jobs, to attract better companies that, quite frankly, can pay more. Child care is expensive. I know that my wife and I, we sacrifice a lot for her to be able to stay home and watch our 2 children. But do I know an exact answer to how to make child care affordable? No, but I'm definitely open to learning and to suggestions.
Thank you. The next question, we'll start with Jared, is what is the state's role in economic development?
Well, I think the state's role in economic development is to, like I said earlier, to foster an environment where we can have companies and corporations that will come in and provide excellent jobs to our citizens. I see a lot of people that they work in North Dakota. They my family, as long as I can remember, has my dad's worked in North Dakota. My office is in North Dakota. And it's, there's real reasons for that, because it's greatly more expensive to do business on this side of the river. But as far as the state goes, I think it is important that we provide transportation, that we make sure that we have good roads, and then we need to look at, how are we taxing these businesses? Are we making it a friendly environment for more businesses to move in and to drive this economic engine on this side of the river?
Thank you. Paul, same question.
Yeah. Well, I think in the long term, you have to make sure you provide high quality education infrastructure. A quality workforce is really, and quality of life is the #1 reason businesses locate here in Minnesota. And in the last 18 months, there's been over 66,000 new jobs in Minnesota created. Our unemployment rate is down to 4.3%, 6th best in the nation and lowest in 8 years. The last week of September, 34,000 people applied for unemployment. That is the lowest number in 14 years in Minnesota. Forbes magazine, which is not a liberal magazine, a very conservative magazine, ranked Minnesota 8th in business climate. And we're now 9th in the nation for household income. So we're moving in the right direction. But the state's been very involved in Rochester and the medical devices, but also locally. Representative Lean was a real champion in fighting for border cities credits and property tax relief for businesses through the disparity reduction program. The last 2 years, businesses in Moorhead will see their property taxes go down 30%. So taxes, we have to stay competitive. I think Representative Lean did a great job in lowering those property taxes in Moorhead.
Thank you. Our next question is, and we'll start with Paul. Many Minnesotans are paying more than they can afford for housing. How will you address affordable housing?
I think the bonding bill this year with $100 million for affordable housing was huge. I carried a bill a few years ago that was an affordable housing bill. And one thing we found out is that in a lot of these areas like Digi-Key and Thief River Falls and up in Roseau and some of those areas, they have the work, but they can't find the housing for the workers. And so that's a huge rural issue. So many times people think affordable housing is kind of a metro issue. It's a huge rural issue. And the percent paying over 40% of their monthly income in housing, which is kind of that break point, 30 or 40%, is way, way too high. So I do think, I'm coming back to some of these things always, but increasing the purchasing power for folks by raising the minimum wage, making sure you've got a good economy and a good educational system, and also providing dollars for affordable housing will go a long way. But that's a huge rural issue. And it's a rural development, economic development issue, and finding places for people to live when they go into some of these small rural areas that have larger manufacturing and they're trying to attain the workers.
I think something we can definitely look at, is what are the property taxes? How can we help to alleviate some of that burden on these folks that want to have a good, affordable place to live, but are having trouble finding it? I guess I don't necessarily agree with Representative Marquardt. You raise minimum wage, and that kind of just shrinks the bottom line for everybody else. I think that there's a lot of people out there that even on a higher minimum wage, it would still be difficult. I don't know a whole lot of folks right now that are working for minimum wage. but I think it's important, it's if you raise minimum wage, you're talking about increasing purchasing power, but it's got to come from somewhere. It's got to, it's going to come from the employers, from the businesses, and their bottom line. It all runs down to there, and then we pay more in the end.
Thank you. The next question will start with Jared. MSU Moorhead recently went through a budget deficit reduction process. What strategies do you anticipate you will implement at the state legislature to support our Minnesota State Colleges and University Institution?
MSUM went, and I've got a good friend that did work at MSUM, and he opted to just resign rather than possibly face some cuts. But the reality is there's cuts. Schools need to be run as a business. They need to be run, and they need to be run well. And so I think it's important that we look at what can we cut, what can't we cut, what's really important to us, and how are we going to make the necessary cuts to remain competitive and offer the highest quality of education possible. And there is a balance there, and I know it's sometimes a hard balance to find, but it needs to be found.
Can you repeat the question one more time?
Yes. The question is, MSU Moorhead recently went through a budget deficit reduction process. What strategies do you anticipate you will implement at the state legislature to support our Minnesota State College and University Institution?
Back in the 1980s, it was in state law that the student was supposed to pick up 40% of the cost, and the state was supposed to pick up 60%. Now it's completely reversed. The student picks up 60%, and the state picks up 40%. So we haven't kept up with investments. In fact, the purchasing power in our higher ed is down to about 1980 levels. But we have to do several things. One, we need more efficiencies. There's no doubt about that. If there's certain classes that there aren't very many students there, then they should probably be dropped. Also, I think it was important that out of about the $300 million that we invested in higher education the last 2 years, about $150 went into the tuition freeze, and another $150 million went into the university and MnSCU systems. So I think part of it is getting efficiencies, but also a very important part is to set priorities of investment. We've talked a lot about the economy, and we've talked a lot about how do you move the state forward, and we know that it's that higher education that's going to make the difference in providing a great long-term future economy for the state of Minnesota.
Thank you. And the next question will start with you. Paul, what do you see as the value of the Minnesota Councils of Color in advising the legislature?
Minnesota is becoming more diverse all the time, and I think that's crucial. And I'm going to get back to education. Our demographer says that our workforce is only going to increase by about 0.3% in the next decade. That means to increase work productivity, we're not going to count on new workers coming in the system. We're going to have a more educated, productive workforce that does come into the system. And the new workers coming into the system are more diverse. And they're also the ones that have the lowest scores in our schools, which is an achievement gap. And there is Rob Grunwald for Minnesota. He's from the Minneapolis Reserve Bank. He's done these statistics. And he says if we can close the achievement gap, that within 15 years after that, we would increase our work productivity and GDP by 2%. Now you might think, well, what's the big deal with 2%? Well, 2% is $5 billion in Minnesota's economy. That'd be like building five Minnesota Viking stadiums every year. That would be the increase to our deal. So getting back is we may have to make sure we listen to the needs of those with the diverse populations. I believe education is really the way that you do that.
Thank you. Jared, same question?
And as Representative Marquardt said, we've got an ever-increasing diversity here in our state, and that's a great thing. I'm a small businessman, and I've had the opportunity to do business with more and more of these individuals, and I find that they're good folks that are coming in, and they want to work hard, and they want to really give back to their communities, and what a wonderful thing that is. That's the American dream, right? To come here to work hard and to have a fair shot. And I think it is important that they do have a fair shot, that they're given every opportunity that I've been given, that any of us have been given as residents here.
Thank you. And our next question, Jared, we'll start with you. Our population is aging. What do we need to do to prepare?
Well, I think definitely the answer, to that. I mean, there's going to be ebb and flow, and in population and in age, what the average age is. We need to make sure that we care for them. I think a real important answer is to lessen the tax burden on families, so that families have more resources to help take care of their elderly, and where there isn't that option, obviously we need to have good nursing homes. We want to take care of our seniors without just sending them off. Say you've lived a great life, and we'll have fun, and we're going to keep living our lives. We need to take care of them and watch over them, and do the best we can.
Thank you. Paul, same question.
The senior population statewide is about 14%, but here in District 4B, it's closer to 20%. So in rural Minnesota, dealing with our senior citizens and making sure that they have a high quality of life for their entire lives is very, very important. So I think there's a couple ways in which you really deal with that. And one, Jared mentioned the nursing homes and the elderly waivers and care for our seniors. That, again, has been an area where for the last 10 years we have really invested in that area, and we did provide a 5% increase, the largest increase in a decade for nursing homes, many of them being forced to close and many of them in debt. Elderly waivers, assisted living, being able to keep seniors in their homes for as long as they possibly can. We increased funding there 6%, the largest increase in 6 years in that area. So that's going to be really important. And the second part, I believe, is property taxes. When property taxes went up about $4 billion in the previous 10 years, it really put a hardship on senior citizens trying to remain in their homes on a fixed income. And this last year, we actually cut taxes by over $60 million in rural Minnesota into the new homestead credit refund. Many senior citizens are able to stay in their homes because we were able to provide some really, really valuable property tax relief.
Thank you. For the next question, we'll start with Paul. And what role will you play in increasing women's economic security in the state?
Well, number one, I voted yes on the bill that we passed this year that dealt with that tried to make wages and so forth more comparable, men and women. But it's other areas, and we've talked a little bit about that. It's childcare, it's all-day, everyday kindergarten, it's education, it's making sure that families really have lower property taxes, and that's what this is all about. And so we passed a number of things this year, Women's Economic Security Act, in trying to equalize so that men and women, if they're doing the same job and the same title, they should be getting the same pay. And that wasn't necessarily the case. So I think what we put into state law will increase the purchasing power for women and also increase the quality of life for women around this state.
Thank you. Jared, same question.
As we've talked about a little bit before, our workforce is getting more and more diverse. And it's important that, whether you're black or white or woman or male, that you have the same opportunity. I think that in the workforce, if you've got a highly talented lady that can do the job well, fantastic. And we need to do our best we can to value all employees equally. As a business owner myself, it's not about if they're male or female or if they're what their background is, but how well can they do the job? And if they do the job well, then I think they're fully entitled to equal and fair pay.
Thank you. And the next question, we'll start with Jared. In this polarizing political environment, how will you seek ways to compromise with legislators who may hold different perspectives from you?
Well, I've always liked to get along with people as best I can. I think you get a lot more done that way. It doesn't do anybody good. I watched my 2 and 4-year-old daughters, sit and fight over a hairbrush this morning, and they just couldn't come to terms on it, and nobody's hair got brushed. But I think sometimes as adults we kind of carry out the same acts, and we need to stop and realize that, hey, sometimes when we're sitting here bickering about this and about that, there's more important issues and more important things that just aren't getting done. And so that if elected, when I get down to St. Paul, I look forward to getting to know everybody and get to know the names on the other side of the aisle and work with them and form good working relationships with them. I know we don't always agree on everything. I've worked for a lot of people that I don't agree with, and I've tried to get along with them as best I can because you get more done that way. Thank you.
Thanks. Paul, same question.
Well, Jared, I've seen that hairbrush down in the state legislature. We argue it over that all the time. And, one thing about the state legislature is that we have to balance the budget, unlike the federal government. So no matter what, you might have a Republican governor and a Democrat or vice versa, you end up having to compromise. The federal government, you don't have to do that. But that is a great point. And if you really look at most of the votes in the state legislature, most of them are bipartisan. The education bill that I put out last year, and that's 42% of the budget, when it left the House, had 10 Republicans voting for it because I worked across the aisle to make sure that it was a plan that both parties would want. And so I think we tend to focus on some of those issues where it really seems to be partisan, but for the most part, especially in my 14 years, I've been in the minority 8 years and majority 6 years. And so you really know how to work with both folks and both parties and getting things done. Because rural Minnesota, you take almost every issue in rural Minnesota, they're not partisan issues. Fighting for veterans and fighting for students and fighting for lower property taxes. We might disagree on how to get there, but we all agree on the goals.
Thank you. Our next question, we'll start with Paul. And for the current tax policy, what do you find to be fair and unfair, and what will you prioritize?
I've really worked a lot on property taxes because I think that is a very unfair tax, not only for senior citizens, families, farmers, but also small businesses. Small businesses, if you are in a recession and you're losing money, that property tax is not based on your income at all. You still have to pay property taxes. And when we were not investing in our communities, our counties, and our cities, and so forth, property taxes in the last 12 years went up an average of $330 million a year. So when Governor Dayton and the new legislature got in, we said enough is enough. We're going to end these regressive property tax increases, and for the first time in a decade, since Kelly Clarkson won, what's that, Star or whatever, that's how long ago, 2002, we lowered property taxes, and they went down $49 million statewide. But in rural Minnesota, where they had gone up an average of $50 million on homeowners for the last 10 years, we actually dropped those taxes $65 million. And on businesses that had gone up $30 million in the last 10 years, we dropped them $11 million. And so that's what I'm going to continue to work on, because in rural Minnesota, for our seniors on fixed incomes, that's the tax that really hits them big time.
As Representative Marquardt just said, property tax, what an unfair tax. We've got, and we talked about our senior citizens, on fixed incomes, when you can't afford to pay your property taxes, but you've lived in your home your entire life, and the state's going to come in and take your home from you, that's to me just absolutely corrupt. So we need to figure out a way to definitely continue to alleviate those taxes. Another tax that I think is terrible in Minnesota is the death taxes, estate taxes. You know, I've recently been talking to some folks that, you know, they say they can't afford to die in Minnesota, and that's a very real issue in Minnesota. Here we treasure our history. We've got, you know, a lot of farms that go back 100 years or more, and what a fantastic thing that is. And then we've got seniors now that are looking at selling those farms and ending that I guess that history, that culture in their family, just because their kids aren't going to be able to afford to pay those taxes when they pass on. And that's something that definitely needs to be addressed.
Thank you. The next question, Jared, we'll start with you. What are your thoughts on the flood diversion and its effect on your district?
Oh boy. You know, that's definitely a huge issue. You know, as long as I can remember, I've been slinging sandbags just about every spring, and you know, we definitely need to look into a real solution to the diversion, figuring out how we're going to not steal from our rural residents, you know, and take away from them. You know, obviously it's important to watch over and to protect our economic engine, you know, Fargo-Moorhead, but we need to look into a way that's fair and that's affordable. You know, the current plan right now, it doesn't seem very affordable, and it doesn't seem very fair. But you know, like there's smarter people than me that can figure this out, and I look forward to getting elected and to working with people and to bring about some genuine resolutions regarding the diversion project.
Thank you. Paul, same question.
I think it's important that Fargo-Moorhead have long-term flood protection. I think everyone in this room agrees with that. But I strongly disagree with the direction of the Diversion Authority that I think has not followed the process, has not followed state law, and has not listened to the voices of people upstream. And we've seen this. Here you have an area, the Comstock area, the Wolverton area, the upstream areas that have never, ever flooded. But by design now of this project, they will flood. They will purposely be flooded to protect some prime South Fargo land for development. And that's what I really have a problem with. And so 4 legislators, we have made a proposal to the Diversion Authority saying that they need to reconfigure the Diversion Authority to make sure that there's members from the North Dakota side and the Minnesota side. And to move anything forward on a project, it would take approval from both the Minnesota side, the North Dakota side, and the Minnesota side. That would assure that we have a fair plan, because right now you have the process is simply not being followed. Their state law has been violated, and the folks upstream are not having their interests protected. And Governor Dayton was here a month ago and basically stated that very thing. And the fact of the matter is that for this project to work, it's going to need the local elected leaders on the federal side and state side, on both sides of the river, approving this, or there's going to be no funding. That's just politically the way it works. So I'd like to see a total reconfiguration on the Diversion Authority that follows the process, follows the law, and listens to the interests of folks upstream.
Thank you. And Paul, the next question, we will start with you. How will you help bridge the rural-urban divide?
That's a very important issue. And the reason why is because rural legislators were in the minority. I think it's about 42% or so and 58% in the urban. So it's important. Let me give you an example. Local government aid. That is about 70% of those dollars come out here to rural Minnesota. But also, Minneapolis and St. Paul get a number of those dollars. And a lot of people will say, well, let's just cut Minneapolis and St. Paul out of it. The problem is, politically, you now have weakened the program. So there's a number of things that we work on in doing that. And that's why, just like our education plan, I was proud of that this year, because we closed the disparity in our education between funding that the average metro district gets and funding that the average rural district gets. We closed the disparity by about 1/3 in 2 years with some of the things that we did, and that was important. But it took working with folks. We just didn't, say we're going to do this. We worked and we did a plan that got people. So you have to know how to work with all the legislators because they all represent each of the 134 districts, and that's really, really important. But I think it's going down there. Like my view is you're putting rural Minnesota first, but you also recognize that you have to compromise and work with people not only across the aisle, but also in other areas of the state.
Well, we definitely need to put rural Minnesota first and bring some common sense down to St. Paul and get some things figured out. You know, I mean, it's like I said, I run a small business and I'd hate to see some of my profits going to something that, you know, doesn't benefit my business at all, doesn't do any good. And I think that's what we're seeing, you know, up here is, you know, in rural Minnesota, greater Minnesota, we're seeing a lot of our money going for projects that, quite frankly, do us no good. And that's not fair. You know, I mean, you look at light rail down in Minneapolis, does that do us any bit of good? No. And I don't think that it's something that we really ought to be paying for. And so we need to focus on taking care of rural Minnesota with rural Minnesota money. And you know, Minneapolis, if they've got programs that they want to do, well, it should be able to be funded by Minneapolis money.
Thank you. And I think in the interest of time, we're going to wrap things up. If you guys want to give a closing statement. Jared, we can start with you.
1 minute or 2 minutes?
We'll do 1 minute if that's...
Well, I'd like to thank the Public Library and the League of Women Voters for the opportunity to come out and speak. And you know, I'm young and I've got a lot to learn, and I know that. And I'm excited to go forward. I think it's important that we get as many young people involved as we can. You know, a lot of folks in the legislature, their careers are decided. Mine is largely undecided. I'm going forward and I'm doing the best I can, and we're gonna see, you know, how my career, I guess, shakes out, and I'm gonna work at it as hard as possible. But I've definitely got a huge stake in making sure that our state is competitive. And I think that's largely, you know, greatly important. We've got a wonderful state. I love Minnesota. It's my home. I've lived here my entire life. And family is extremely important to me. And I want my kids to grow up and look at Minnesota as a great place to live and as a viable place to have a great career and to raise their families.
Thank you. Paul, your closing statement?
Well, again, thank you to the League of Women Voters. Jared, thank you. I've been very proud to serve 14 years in the state legislature. And again, the most enjoyable thing I do as a legislator is getting out, knocking on doors, and meeting with folks. And when you do that, you hear what's going on, and you hear the challenges that folks face out in rural Minnesota. And we're moving in the right direction in the state. I'm very optimistic about our future, but we have more work to do. We have to look at agricultural property taxes. We're working on some things to lower that. We have to make sure senior citizen health care is affordable and that high quality. We have to make sure that for our students going on to college that it's affordable and accessible. Property taxes, and we have to make sure our people can stay in their homes, and it's families and small businesses that can benefit when you can do that. So Minnesota is a great state. We're doing very well. And if I have the honor to serve another 2 years in the state legislature, I want to continue to work on behalf of the residents of District 4B and moving the state forward, continuing to look at every single issue in rural Minnesota and how it impacts people and how we can make things better for our senior citizens, our families, our farmers, our veterans, our small businesses. That's the key. And this government is your government. And we're listening to what you have to say. And so please, anyone listening out there, feel free to always contact us. And again, I'd appreciate your support for another 2 years. And thanks for the honor for allowing me to serve you.
Thank you. And I would like to thank the Minnesota House District 4B candidates, Jared LeDuc and Paul Marquardt, for being here today. This forum will be available on our website. And for more information on the League or to become a member, please visit our website or our Facebook page. And our website is lwvnd.org. Thank you.